In the year 1861 and 1862, the North got a taste of the South by the Southerners infiltrating the northern cities. Many unwelcome Southerners soon would make their presence known. The Southerners fled to the North because they wanted freedom, and as soon as the Federal Army occupied the Confederate territory, they made their move. Many of these Southerners consisted of families, children, and women. Many of these slaves considered the Civil War the Freedom War. When the Southerners came over Union lines, their plans consisted taking up jobs, for example in factories, farming, and different trades. These new arrivals were looking to plant themselves in the North and settle down in their new lives of freedom. Many of the Northern's reaction was seen in a state of frustration, and they were overwhelmed. They felt overwhelmed due to jobs and their homeland being occupied. They felt that there wasn't enough room for the both of them. With all of the chaos from the Southerners fleeing to the North and trying to settle down in their new freedom to the North having a bad reaction, the main point should be taken into consideration is freedom for all.
Families in the North were known to be wealthier and more prosperous than families in the South. The North, known as the Union, was made up of 20 free states and 5 border states. Their wealth came from heavy industrialization, which provided weapons and supplies for their war. But like families in the South, families in the North were greatly affected by the war. The Civil War had huge effects on families during the war and after it as well. In 1863, the federal government passed the Union's Draft Law, also known as the Enrollment Act. This allowed men between 18 and 45 to be enrolled into local militia units. These men could be drafted for national service at any time. There were few exemptions for this act, such as being employed in certain jobs, paying a $300 fee, or hiring a substitute. Because these exemptions favored the rich, the Civil War was known as a rich man's war, but a poor man's fight. The Enrollment Act impacted many families in the North. Eldest sons and husbands left their families to fight the war. Like the South, the war left women in the North to care and provide for their children. The North women used this opportunity to take advantage of the jobs that were now available to them. Since sons and husbands were primary breadwinners for their family, the women had to find a way to make up for the loss in salary. They made up this loss by taking up jobs that were previously male-dominated, such as nursing and clerks in government offices. After the war, few soldiers returned home to rejoin their families. Many of them were injured and could not continue working in the jobs they once had, so women had to continue providing for their families. This was a positive effect of the war. Women found a permanent place in the workforce and worked in jobs such as nursing, retail sales, and white-collar government jobs. The Civil War had great effects on families during and after it. Even though the war hurt families in the sense that they were not how they used to be, it also strengthened families by allowing mothers to have a place in the workforce.
Families in the South were affected greatly. Women assumed the work naturally done by men, like managing the plantations, harvesting crops, and running businesses, while simultaneously still doing their jobs as women. The soldiers tried sustaining their role in the family with letters, but the mail was slowed by the war and they just weren't good enough. Women urged men to desert the army and also filed petitions with the Confederate Secretary for exemption from the war, but most were unsuccessful. There were divisions between families because they were on opposing sides of the war. Life was harder for the civilians in the South because it was mainly an agricultural society rather than a factory-driven society like in the North. They didn't have the resources to make necessities for the war, so they were less armed than the North. People had no protection for themselves or their families while trying to go on with their daily lives and had to live in fear. The North's Navy blocked the South's ports so that they would be cut off from all other countries to economically strangle them. The South only had to survive, the North had to restore the Union. The Southerners faced inflation and slave resistance because they all wanted to go to the free North. Many families reconciled in practical ways as the war was ending by providing material support, but found it harder to reunite emotionally. Black families saw the war as a time to reunite with their lost family members after years of separation. As the Union entered the South, the slaves knew freedom was close, and roughly 100,000 black men from Virginia fled to the army camps in order to enlist in the Union Army. Women and children eventually followed the men, but were being treated worse because of their husbands' absence. The women helped establish makeshift refugee settlements on the army camps, which also served as the place for black family reunions during and after the war. Officials from the Freedmen's Bureau helped newly freed blacks to realize their new acquired legal rights to marriage and child custody. Black men earned a newly elevated public position over the women, which created a gender imbalance unfamiliar to black families.